Welcome to Sleepy Clinical Psychology, where we will relax, unwind, learn about psychology, and maybe fall asleep. This episode will talk about cognitive behavioral therapy for anxiety and depression. This episode is narrated to you by Dr. Tomislav Zbozinek, licensed clinical psychologist, Associate Director of UCLA's Anxiety and Depression Research Center, and founder and director of Anxiety and Depression Treatment Specialists, a psychology private practice. Introduction. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is among the most extensively researched and widely practiced psychological treatments in the world. Developed from the convergence of behavioral therapy in the mid-1900s and the cognitive revolution that followed in the 1960s and 70s, CBT is founded on a simple but clinically profound idea that the way people think about and respond to their circumstances exerts a powerful influence over how they feel, and that meaningful change in thinking and behavior can produce lasting improvements in emotional well-being. Over decades of clinical trials, CBT has accumulated a robust evidence base supporting its efficacy across a broad range of mental health conditions, with anxiety disorders and depression representing its most thoroughly studied and consistently successful applications. Here, we discuss a comprehensive account of CBT as applied to anxiety and depression. We first discuss the internal experiences cycle, a model that articulates how thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, and behaviors are interconnected. We then examine a critical and often misunderstood principle at the heart of CBT, that different components of this cycle are subject to very different degrees of direct voluntary control, though all components can be changed through indirect control. Specifically, we have little to no direct control over our emotions and physical sensations. We have some direct control over our thoughts, and we have the most direct control over our behaviors. This hierarchy of controllability has important implications for how CBT is structured and how its techniques are best understood and implemented. We will examine three core CBT techniques: cognitive restructuring, exposure therapy, and behavioral activation, and illustrate each with clinical examples drawn from anxiety and depression. Finally, we will consider how these techniques work together to ultimately transform the internal experiences cycle to improve mental well-being. The internal experiences cycle. At the conceptual heart of CBT lies a model of how internal psychological experiences interact to sustain distress. This model, referred to here as the internal experiences cycle, identifies four interconnected components that comprise our internal experience. These four components are thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, and behaviors. Together, these components form a dynamic system in which each element influences and is influenced by the others, creating feedback loops that can either maintain and amplify distress, or, when the cycle is interrupted, facilitate recovery and well-being. The four components. Thoughts. Thoughts are the cognitive content of experience, the words in our mind, and the images that involve all five senses: taste, touch, smell, hearing, and vision. In the context of emotional distress, thoughts are often automatic. They arise rapidly and spontaneously in response to situations before deliberate reflection has an opportunity to occur. Aaron Beck, whose work in the 1960s and 1970s laid the cognitive foundations for CBT, observed that depressed patients were characterized by a consistent pattern of negative automatic thoughts organized around what he called the cognitive triad. The triad includes negative views of the self, the world, and the future. For example, a depressed person might think, without necessarily choosing to do so, "I am worthless. Nothing ever goes right. Things will never get better." With anxiety, automatic thoughts are characteristically centered on threat, perceived danger, anticipated catastrophe, and the overestimation of the probability and severity of negative outcomes. A person with social anxiety might automatically think, upon walking into a room, "Everyone is judging me," or "I am going to say something embarrassing." A person with health anxiety might interpret a mild headache as evidence of a serious neurological condition. These thoughts feel, in the moment, like unquestioned truths rather than interpretations or hypotheses, a quality that gives them their psychological power and their clinical significance. Emotions. Emotions are the affective states that color experience. For example, fear, sadness, shame, guilt, anger, joy, curiosity, confidence, excitement, and peacefulness. In the context of CBT, emotions are understood as responses to cognitive appraisals of situations rather than as direct responses to situations themselves. The classic example is that of two people who receive critical feedback at work. One experiences shame and despair, the other experiences gratitude and determination. The difference lies not in the external event, but in how each person interprets that external event. Emotions are not merely subjective feelings, they have a motivational character that shapes behavior. Fear motivates avoidance, protection, and defense. Sadness motivates withdrawal and recovery. Shame motivates concealment or atonement. Understanding this motivational quality is essential to understanding how the internal experiences cycle sustains distress. The emotion that is generated by a thought does not merely feel unpleasant. It drives behavior in ways that typically confirm and reinforce the original thought, which reinforces the internal experiences cycle. Physical sensations. The body is not a passive bystander in emotional experience. Physical sensations are an integral component of every emotional state, reflecting the physiological changes that accompany emotions. Anxiety is accompanied by characteristic somatic experiences, such as a racing heart, tightened chest, shallow breathing, muscle tension, dizziness, lightheadedness, sweating, or or abdominal distress. Depression is associated with a different but equally pervasive somatic signature: heaviness, fatigue, slow movement, disrupted sleep, and diminished appetite. These physical sensations feed back into the cycle in important ways. In anxiety disorders, particularly panic disorder and health anxiety, the physical sensations of anxiety become threatening stimuli in their own right. A racing heart generates the thought, "I'm having a panic attack," or "I will die," which intensifies anxiety, which intensifies the racing heart, which intensifies the thought, in a catastrophic loop in which the body's own stress response becomes the primary source of perceived danger. Physical sensations thus function both as products of cognitive appraisal and as inputs to cognitive appraisal, amplifying the cycle through somatic feedback. Behaviors. Behaviors are the observable actions that emerge from the interaction of thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations. In the context of anxiety, behaviors are typically organized around avoidance, avoiding feared situations, people, objects, or internal states. In depression, behaviors are typically organized around withdrawal and deactivation, retreating from activities, relationships, and responsibilities that were previously meaningful and engaging. Both avoidance and withdrawal are understandable responses to distress. They provide short-term relief, but they are, over time, the mechanisms by which the internal experiences cycle sustains and deepens itself. Avoidance and anxiety prevents the individual from discovering the true likelihood that their feared outcome would occur and its severity if the feared outcome were to occur, thereby preserving the belief of danger and maintaining fear. Withdrawal in depression removes the person from rewarding activities that would otherwise generate positive emotions, mastery experiences, and social reinforcement, deepening the emotional depletion and reinforcing the cognitive triad of worthlessness, hopelessness, and pessimism. The behavior intended as relief becomes the engine of persistence for both anxiety and depression. The cycle in motion. The four components of the internal experiences cycle do not operate in linear sequence. They interact bidirectionally and simultaneously, forming a system that is continuously active. A thought generates an emotion. The emotion generates physical sensations. The sensations confirm and intensify the thought. The thought motivates a behavior. The behavior produces consequences that generates new thoughts, completing and reinforcing the cycle. Over time, these cycles become habitual. The person develops characteristic patterns of interpretation, emotional response, somatic reactivity, and behavioral avoidance or withdrawal that operate automatically below the threshold of deliberate reflection. Understanding the internal experiences cycle is therapeutic in itself. Many people in psychological distress feel overwhelmed by the totality of their experience, by the sense that their anxiety or depression is a single, undifferentiated mass of suffering that cannot be approached, modified, or overcome. The cycle model offers a map. It disaggregates the experience into identifiable components, each with its own characteristics and its own relationship to voluntary control. And it is precisely this relationship to voluntary control that we discuss next. Control, volition, and the hierarchy of influence. A crucial and frequently misunderstood principle of CBT is that the four components of the internal experiences cycle are not equally amenable to direct voluntary control. This asymmetry of controllability is not an incidental feature of the model. It is foundational to understanding why CBT is structured as it is, why some of its techniques work better than others, and why so many people struggle to benefit from well-intentioned but misguided advice, such as just calm down or just try to feel happy. Emotions and physical sensations, the limits of direct control. Emotions and physical sensations are, in general, not subject to direct voluntary control. A person cannot simply decide to stop feeling anxious, afraid, sad, or ashamed, at least not in any immediate or reliable sense. The person similarly cannot decide to feel happy, confident, strong, eager, or serene. Emotions are not like light switches that can be turned on or off as desired. This is not a personal failing or a lack of willpower. It is a feature of humanity and how the emotional and somatic systems are organized in the brain and body. Emotional responses are generated by subcortical structures, particularly the amygdala and related limbic circuits, that operate rapidly, automatically, and largely independently of conscious intention. The prefrontal cortex can modulate emotional responses, but it cannot switch them on or off on command. Attempts to directly suppress or control emotions often backfire. Research on the ironic effects of mental control has demonstrated that efforts to suppress unwanted thoughts and feelings frequently increase their frequency and intensity. Telling oneself to not feel anxious in a feared situation typically amplifies anxiety. Trying to feel happy when depressed typically generates frustration at the failure of the attempt, which compounds the low mood. Recognizing this limitation in control is liberating rather than discouraging. It means that the therapeutic goal is not to directly produce a particular emotional state, but to change the cognitive and behavioral inputs that indirectly give rise to emotional states. Similarly, physical sensations, the racing heart of anxiety, the heaviness of depression, cannot be directly willed into or out of existence. They can be modified indirectly through relaxation techniques, breathing exercises, or changes in thoughts or physical activity. But these modifications work by altering physiological parameters that feed into the somatic experience rather than by direct command. The person with panic disorder who instructs their heart to slow down during a panic attack will likely find that the instruction is ineffective. The person who learns slow diaphragmatic breathing will find that this behavioral change, practiced regularly, does produce measurable changes in physical sensations, not through willpower, but through biological mechanisms. Thoughts, partial voluntary control. Thoughts occupy a middle position in the hierarchy of controllability. Automatic thoughts, by definition, arise without deliberate intention. They cannot be entirely prevented. However, they can be identified, examined, challenged, and, over time, modified This is the domain of cognitive restructuring, which we will discuss in detail later. Deliberate, effortful cognitive work can interrupt the automatic quality of maladaptive thoughts, introduce alternative perspectives, and gradually shift the habitual patterns of interpretation that sustain distress. This partial controllability of thoughts has important therapeutic implications. Cognitive change is possible, but it requires practice, persistence, and the right techniques. It is also not instantaneous. Changing deeply ingrained automatic thoughts requires repeated, deliberate engagement with the same patterns of thinking across many situations and over an extended period of time. Expecting immediate cognitive transformation is likely unrealistic and potentially demoralizing. What is realistic is a gradual process of increasing flexibility in thinking, of developing the habit of treating automatic thoughts as hypotheses to be evaluated, rather than as facts to be automatically accepted. Behaviors, the highest degree of direct control. Behaviors are the component of the internal experiences cycle most directly and immediately subject to voluntary control. A person cannot directly decide to feel less anxious, but they can decide, with effort and perhaps with support, to enter the feared situation despite the anxiety. A depressed person cannot directly will themselves to feel energized and motivated, but they can, with support and structure, decide to go for a walk, call a friend, or complete a small task that they have been avoiding. These behavioral choices, difficult as they are in the context of significant distress, have downstream effects on thoughts, emotions, and physical sensations that no amount of direct emotional willing can achieve. This is why behavior is the primary lever of change in CBT. When a person with anxiety enters a feared situation and stays long enough to discover whether their feared outcome occurs, they acquire direct experiential evidence that often refutes their threat expectation. Evidence that is far more compelling than any argument or reassurance could provide. When a depressed person re-engages with activities that were previously meaningful, they expose themselves to the natural reinforcers that produce positive emotions and interrupt the withdrawal cycle. The behavior changes first, the emotion and thoughts follow. Understanding this sequence, that behavioral change drives emotional and cognitive change, is perhaps the single most important principle for both therapists and clients to internalize. Waiting for emotions to improve before changing behaviors could take an indefinitely long time. So changing behaviors first and experiencing emotional benefits second is often much more effective and realistic. Cognitive restructuring. Cognitive restructuring is the set of techniques in CBT designed to identify, evaluate, and modify the maladaptive automatic thoughts and underlying beliefs that sustain emotional distress. Cognitive restructuring is not about replacing negative thoughts with artificially positive ones. Cognitive restructuring is about accuracy, developing a more realistic, evidence-based, flexible, and balanced appraisal of situations, the self, and the future. If our thoughts are accurate, then our emotions, physical sensations, and behaviors will be based on reality as well. Identifying cognitive distortions. The first step in cognitive restructuring is to notice that you are feeling anxious, sad, angry, ashamed, or another form of emotional distress. Then, rewind your mind and ask yourself, what was my thought right before I felt distressed? This can help identify the automatic thought that occurred. By doing this process repeatedly, you can identify patterns of automatic, inaccurate thoughts that occur, often called cognitive distortions. There are several common cognitive distortions that occur for most people and usually occur more often in anxious or depressed individuals. Catastrophizing is believing that a severe outcome is almost certain to occur, and the individual believes they cannot cope with that outcome. For example, the person who receives a critical comment from a colleague immediately concludes that their career is over. All or nothing thinking is evaluating situations in absolute binary terms. For example, I made a mistake, therefore I am a complete failure. Mind reading is assuming one knows what others are thinking, and these thoughts are usually negative. For example, everyone at this party thinks I am boring. Emotional reasoning is treating the presence of a feeling as evidence of a potential fact. I feel scared, therefore something bad is going to happen. For a person with anxiety, the cognitive restructuring process might begin with the situation of receiving a critical email from a supervisor, for example. The automatic thought is, she thinks I am incompetent and is going to fire me. The associated emotions are intense fear and shame. The cognitive distortion at work is catastrophizing combined with mind reading. The structured examination of this thought involves listing what evidence supports the thought and what evidence refutes the thought. It is important for these lists to be thorough, accurate, and convincing. The goal is not simply to feel better or to feel more positively. The goal is to think more accurately. After compiling the evidence supporting and refuting the automatic thought, determine if this automatic thought is the most accurate thought. Almost by definition, if there is any evidence refuting the thought, then this automatic thought is not the most accurate thought. Then, write down what is the most accurate thought based on the evidence. For example, instead of keeping the original automatic thought, she thinks I am incompetent and is going to fire me, perhaps the most accurate thought is, she's right. I did make a mistake, but everyone makes mistakes. I can correct this mistake, and I generally do well in my job, so it's very unlikely that I will get fired. Cognitive restructuring usually reveals that the evidence for the catastrophic interpretation is thin. The alternative interpretations are more probable, and the worst-case scenario, even if it occurred, would be survivable. Socratic questioning and thought records. The primary technique of cognitive restructuring is Socratic questioning, the therapist's use of carefully formulated questions to guide the patient towards examining the basis for their beliefs rather than simply being told that those beliefs are incorrect. Socratic questions are designed not to lead the patient to a predetermined conclusion, but to open up the automatic thought to genuine scrutiny. What is the evidence for this thought? Is there evidence against it? What are other ways of looking at this situation? What is the most realistic outcome? If a friend had this thought, what would I say to that friend? These questions invite the patient to become a curious scientist of their own experience, to treat their appraisals as theories subject to evidence rather than as facts beyond questioning. Thought records are the written tool through which this process is practiced between sessions. A standard thought record asks the patient to describe the situation that triggered distress, record the automatic thoughts and the emotions it generated with a 0 to 100 rating of intensity of those emotions, identify the cognitive distortion such as catastrophizing, generate a more balanced and accurate alternative thought, and re-rate the emotional intensity following the exercise. Over time, repeated use of thought records develops the cognitive habit of catching automatic thoughts in the moment and subjecting them to rapid, flexible, evidence-based reappraisal, a habit that eventually becomes less effortful and more automatic itself. Exposure therapy. Exposure therapy is the behavioral cornerstone of CBT for anxiety disorders. It is based on the principle that anxiety is maintained by avoidance, that every time a person avoids a feared situation, they prevent themselves from acquiring the disconfirming evidence that would otherwise weaken the fear, and they reinforce the implicit belief that avoidance is necessary for safety. Exposure therapy systematically reverses this pattern by guiding the patient to approach feared stimuli in a structured, supported, and gradually escalating way. The rationale for exposure. The mechanism through which exposure produces its effects has been debated over decades, and the theoretical account has evolved considerably. Early models of exposure therapy emphasized habituation, the idea that repeated contact with a feared stimulus would, through simple repetition, reduce the anxiety response. The most recent model, the inhibitory retrieval model of exposure therapy, proposes that exposure works not by erasing the fear memory, but by creating a new inhibitory memory, a competing association that the feared stimulus signals safety rather than danger. What both accounts agree on is the essential role of behavioral approach. The patient must enter the feared situation rather than avoid it. The inhibitory retrieval model focuses on learning how dangerous or safe situations really are. If a person does repeated exposures and learns that the situation is actually safe, then anxiety will subside. From this perspective, the most important element of exposure is expectancy violation, the experience of a specific, predicted catastrophe not occurring. Before each exposure exercise, the patient is asked to articulate their specific feared outcome, not a vague sense of dread, but a concrete, testable prediction. For example, if I speak up in this meeting, people will reject me. The feared outcome of rejection is behaviorally defined for that exposure. For example, people will roll their eyes, they will say negative things to me about me with a sharp tone of voice, they will mockingly laugh at me. After the exposure, the prediction is examined. Did the feared outcome occur? How do you know? In the vast majority of cases, the feared outcome does not occur. If the feared outcome repeatedly does not occur across a variety of situations, the individual will learn that the situation is safer than they originally thought, so anxiety in that situation will subside. Applying exposure to anxiety, a social anxiety example. Consider a person with social anxiety disorder whose primary feared situation is speaking up in professional meetings. Their automatic thought is that any contribution they make will be visibly incompetent, that their anxiety will be apparent to everyone, and that colleagues will lose respect for them and, therefore, reject them. As a result, they habitually remain silent in meetings, even when they have relevant contributions to make. This silence is a safety behavior that prevents them from learning whether speaking up will actually result in rejection like their anxious mind predicts. In CBT, the therapist will discuss with the patient the various factors that make the patient believe their feared outcome is more likely to occur, and the other factors that make the patient believe their feared outcome is less likely to occur. With this conceptualization, the therapist and patient can design exposures that elevate the patient's certainty that their feared outcome will occur, because if the feared outcome does not occur, that can be a potent learning experience, suggesting that maybe the patient doesn't need to be so anxious in that situation because maybe the feared outcome won't occur as expected. Safety behaviors, the subtle strategies patients use to reduce anxiety and make them feel protected from their feared outcome's occurrence. Over-preparing in every contribution, only speaking when authority figures are absent, profusely apologizing and asking for reassurance from others, these are all explicitly identified and progressively removed during exposure. Safety behaviors must be eliminated or weaned because they prevent the full experience of the feared situation, and, crucially, safety behaviors prevent the full violation of the feared expectation. In other words, if a patient does an exposure that includes safety behaviors and the feared outcome does not occur, patients often believe the feared outcome did not occur because of the safety behaviors. This means that the safety behaviors soak up the learning. This prevents patients from learning whether the feared outcome would occur without the safety behavior's presence, which is crucial for learning and long-term anxiety reduction. For example, does a person really need to prepare for 8 hours to provide a standard 2-minute update on a project in order to avoid rejection? Preparing for 8 hours every time there is a minor public speaking role is costly in terms of time, effort, and emotion. Perhaps removing the safety behavior of over-preparation would help the patient learn whether preparing to such a degree is actually needed in order to prevent rejection. Perhaps preparing for 30 minutes is more reasonable given the nature of the work. By removing the over-preparation and speaking in front of the group, the patient can learn whether over-preparation is necessary to prevent rejection. If it isn't necessary, then the patient can learn to be less anxious and can get back many hours of their day as a result. Behavioral activation. Behavioral activation is the primary behavioral intervention in CBT for depression. It emerges directly from the behavioral theory of depression developed in the 1970s, which proposed that depression is maintained by a low rate of positive reinforcement from the environment, which is a consequence of the withdrawal and social isolation that accompany low mood. As a depressed person withdraws from previously rewarding activities, they deprive themselves of the experiences that would otherwise generate positive emotions, mastery, and social connection, which deepens the depression and reinforces the withdrawal. The rationale for behavioral activation. Behavioral activation reverses this cycle by directly targeting the behavioral component of the internal experiences cycle, the one component most amenable to voluntary control. Rather than waiting for mood to improve before re-engaging with life, an approach that typically fails because the mood improvement often requires changes in thoughts or behaviors first, behavioral activation operates on the principle that action precedes motivation in depression. The depressed person is guided to engage with valued or rewarding activities not because they feel motivated to do so, but because the engagement itself will generate the mood improvement that currently seems like a prerequisite. This principle, that behavioral change drives emotional and cognitive change, is clinically powerful but requires careful therapeutic work to communicate and execute. Depressed patients often feel that it is futile to engage in activities they do not currently feel motivated to pursue. The CBT therapist helps the patient understand that in depression, the normal relationship between motivation and action is reversed. The action must come first, and the motivation will follow in its wake. This reframing transforms behavioral activation from a demand to feel better into a behavioral experiment. For example, let's try this and observe what effect it has, rather than predicting in advance that it will be pointless. Applying behavioral activation to depression, a clinical example. Consider a patient with moderate to severe depression who has, over several months, progressively withdrawn from most of the activities that previously gave their life meaning and pleasure. They have stopped exercising, declined social invitations, reduced their work to the bare minimum, abandoned hobbies, and spend most of their free time in bed or on the couch. Their automatic thoughts center on worthlessness and hopelessness. For example, there is no point doing anything. Nothing gives me pleasure anymore. I am too tired. I feel too heavy. It would not make a difference. What's the point? Behavioral activation with this patient begins with activity monitoring. For 1 to 2 weeks, the patient records their daily activities and rates each for mood, mastery, which is a sense of achievement or accomplishment, and pleasure on simple numerical scales. This monitoring invariably reveals several important patterns. First, activity and mood are correlated, even when the patient believes they are not. There are typically detectable, if modest, differences in mood associated with different activities. Second, the lowest mood periods are typically associated with the most passive, socially isolated, and unstructured activities, such as lying in bed, ruminating, or watching TV alone. Third, activities that the patient predicted would be pointless often generate more positive emotions than expected. This mood monitoring data forms the basis for activity scheduling, the collaborative planning of specific, concrete activities at specific times, beginning with activities of modest demand and gradually expanding to include previously valued pursuits. The activities selected are chosen collaboratively based on the patient's own history of rewarding activities, a crucial point, as behavioral activation is not about prescribing a generic schedule of wholesome behavior, but rather about reconnecting the individual with their own sources of meaning, pleasure, and accomplishment. Social engagement, physical activity, creative pursuits, and occupational tasks are all targeted across a graduated schedule that respects the energy constraints imposed by depression, while systematically challenging the withdrawal that sustains it. As the patient re-engages with activities, they begin to acquire evidence against their depressive thoughts and feelings. The experience of completing a task generates a modest but real sense of mastery that contradicts the belief of incompetence. The experience of social contact generates a modest but real sense of connection that contradicts the belief of unlovability. These behavioral experiments do not instantly reverse depressive beliefs, but they gradually accumulate as experiential evidence that the automatic thoughts are not accurate, providing raw material for cognitive restructuring to work on. Integration, CBT as a system of change. Cognitive restructuring, exposure therapy, and behavioral activation are not independent techniques that happen to share a theoretical framework. They are deeply integrated interventions that work through overlapping mechanisms and that are most powerful when deployed in combination. Cognitive restructuring modifies the interpretations that generate distress. Exposure directly challenges the behavioral avoidance and beliefs that maintain anxiety. Behavioral activation reverses the withdrawal that deepens depression. Each technique influences all four components of the internal experiences cycle, and each creates conditions that enhance the effectiveness of the others. In the treatment of anxiety, cognitive restructuring and exposure are natural complements. Exposure provides the lived, experiential evidence that can be used as evidence in cognitive restructuring. In the treatment of depression, behavioral activation and cognitive restructuring are similarly synergistic. The behavioral experiments generated by activity scheduling provide the raw experiential material that cognitive restructuring works on. As the patient re-engages with activities and discovers that the predicted pointlessness was not accurate, the therapist can facilitate cognitive restructuring around those specific experiences, helping the patient to extract and internalize the disconfirming evidence they have generated. Cognition and behavior are treated not as separate targets, but as two aspects of a single interconnected system. The internal experiences cycle provides the conceptual map that unifies all of these interventions. At the beginning of treatment, this cycle is typically running in a direction that amplifies and sustains distress. Negative thoughts generate negative emotions, which motivates avoidance or withdrawal, which produce consequences, situations never confronted, pleasures never accessed, consequences that generate more negative thoughts. CBT intervenes on this cycle through the two components that we can control: thoughts and behaviors. Conclusion. Cognitive behavioral therapy offers a coherent, evidence-based, and clinically practical framework for understanding and treating anxiety and depression. Its conceptual foundation, the internal experiences cycle, provides a map of the system that sustains distress, articulating how thoughts, emotions, physical sensations, and behaviors are interdependent and mutually reinforcing. Through cognitive restructuring, CBT helps people think more accurately and therefore develop emotions, physical sensations, and behaviors that are in line with reality. Through exposure therapy, CBT reduces anxious avoidance and helps individuals learn their feared outcomes often do not occur as expected, which reduces long-term anxiety. Through behavioral activation, CBT reverses the withdrawal that sustains depression and rebuilds access to the natural sources of positive reinforcement that a meaningful life requires. The enduring strength of CBT lies not only in its evidence base, but in its transparency. It teaches patients a model of their own distress and the skills to apply that model independently, long after the formal course of therapy has ended. The ultimate goal of CBT is not a patient who is dependent on a therapist, but a patient who has learned to meaningfully improve their internal experiences cycle on their own. By doing so, the patient has developed the knowledge and skills to live a higher quality of life, free from the excessive burden anxiety and depression can produce. This has been Sleepy Clinical Psychology, narrated to you by Dr. Tomislav Zbozinek. If you stayed awake, then I hope you both learned something helpful and feel relaxed. If you fell asleep, then I hope you feel more rested upon awakening. Thank you for your time, your attention, and the drifting of your attention. Please feel free to listen to my other episodes, which explore more topics in clinical psychology that you can listen to, fall asleep to, or both. Until next time.